and the equality of our health, our well-being, and our education systems. It really paints those pictures, and it allows everybody to see their place and the value they bring to that placemaking job that is at the heart of this process. It gives a really, really different lens to what progress means altogether. It asks some really powerful questions about what might be different if we use this lens to make those big planning decisions about what gets built and what doesn't get built, to make those big investments. What do we prioritize with our limited resources, whether they're financial resources or skills resources or human or environmental resources? Where do we pinpoint them to provide the most value for our citizens now and for generations to come? And that's what's starting to happen, as we're seeing in the headlines in different countries and parts of the world, and increasingly in parts of the UK. And we're here to support those pioneers in trying to do that. We like to think it's a little bit different from a lot of things that are out there. And these are 4 headline ways that it's different. Firstly, it's really consistent. It's consistent, rigorous national data. We're not pulling this stuff out of nowhere. It comes from the core trusted bodies. And it's consistent across all the local authorities in England and Wales. We publish it every year, and we're publishing it today with 363 upper and lower tier authorities. So that consistency allows that learning, best practice, mutual support to emerge. It's comprehensive, because it avoids that really simplistic attempt to summarize things into a single number, but it keeps it accessible by giving us that framework that keeps the headlines accessible, but provides the comprehensive data that really helps people to use it on the ground. It's challenging. This is not about business as usual. Pioneers are the ones using these metrics. They're the ones who are shaking things up, who are trying things differently. There are people around the world doing this, and there are more and more people in the UK doing it too. It's about thinking about a measure of progress that's delivering the growth in our capacity to thrive, and that is quite a powerful and quite a disruptive idea. It's also really practical, and it's local. We're passionate about the idea that people experience their well-being locally, and therefore some of the solutions need to be developed at a local level. National changes are deeply important too, of course, but we're passionate about our role in making this practical for people on the front line to use this in a day-to-day basis to make different decisions and provide different solutions. And finally, it's really important that this is not just for mayors. This is relevant right across what we call the golden thread of impact. It's helpful to citizens both to think about their own place, but also to push for change with those decision makers, hold them to account for different things. It's relevant to projects and communities trying to play their role in that bigger place, supporting citizens, yes, but also supporting change on a social and environmental level. It's important to funders and commissioners, and we have some of those both on our panel and with you in the audience, who are increasingly working at a place-based level and are increasingly using the Thriving Places Index to understand those places better and to work with local people to understand and improve the context in which their work is targeted. And of course, for leaders and decision makers in that place and policy space, how can we be supporting them to see the ripple effects of their work in and around the policy and practice that they are supporting and delivering? So, suffice to say, I of course think this is a really, really powerful dashboard of data. It gives us a new compass, but it's really, really important to actually understand what the data behind it is telling us about the places that we live. And for that, I'm going to hand over to our fantastic head of research and measurement, Lisa Muller. And she's going to tell us a little bit more about what 2020's data tells us and how you, an individual and a local level, can start using our website and our resources and our support services to really start understanding what that data means for you where you are. So over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Liz. As a first bit, I've actually chosen just to show you the sort of the key results that you get to see when you type in the local authority that you're interested in. So this is just an example showing the scores for Bradford, and as Liz has explained, this shows the key headlines: local conditions, equality and sustainability. And just a few words on scoring. We've tried to make this a lot clearer on the website this time around as well. All scores are between 0 and 10. They're averaged, so anything that's kind of medium or yellow is about average across England. Higher scores are always better and lower scores are always worse. So we have taken out some of this confusion on whether high emissions, obviously high emissions are bad, but we've changed the scores so that when you look at the scores, a higher number is better, even if it says emissions next to it. So just for a little bit of clarification. And so this is the first summary that you see. And then, Liz, if we can move the next slide, there's the more detailed picture, which also Liz described earlier. When you look at the index for your local authority of interest, you can see here all of the scores for all of the different domains and subdomains. So this example, Wigan, at the first glance across all three headlines, a very much average local authority, but at a much closer look, you can see that although they're performing just as well as all the average for all of England, there are still some areas where work needs to be done, and other areas where they're performing much better, obviously, as well. So that we hope with this information that's freely available on our website, you can really begin to understand how the different factors influence well-being in your local area. And we're going to move on to some key results. There's the we've got a publication again out this year with some key results across all of England and a little bit of Wales. Here are some highlights across the country. We've sort of tried to pick out a few bits. The report is available online, so if you can't really read all of the words here, you can find that on our website. But we really wanted to highlight some positive stories across the country, and sort of start to see what stories we can tell from the data, and also maybe start describing what a thriving place might look like by looking at the different positive highlights across different local authorities. So yeah, feel free to look at this in more detail on the website. We'll move on again to look at the local conditions in more detail. So there you go. So this is a new way of looking at the data that we've started this year, which is called a tree map. So in previous years, we've looked at the maps only. Obviously, the maps tell you geographically the sort of area of each local authority, but they don't really represent the proportion of population that this applies to. So this map shows the proportional population in each of the local authority area across the 9 regions of England. So you can see by the colour coding, which is the same as for the scores that we had earlier, how that spreads across the population in England. Yeah, so if we move on again to this, so yeah, there's we have updated data within each of the headline domains. So in local conditions in particular, we've updated the social fragmentation index. This is part of the measure for social cohesion. And we've added some data such as access to woodlands, safety in the dark, the percentage of people who get 5 fruit and veg a day, as well as membership in organisations and neighbourhood trusts. So a lot of this data comes from the Understanding Society survey data set. And it improves, well, these ones are added to the local conditions to basically improve the richness of data that we have in the Thriving Places Index. And if we move on to the next slide. So equality is another one of our headline measures. So this looks at how equally the local conditions are improved across England. So this combines indicators related to health, income, gender, social, and ethnicity. Again, all of these are scored so that higher scores are better. Yeah, there's a little example here which says that Salford has the least inequality in weekly income, which I think was also in the highlights earlier. So that's just one of the examples of the indicators that are within within this headline domain, right? The equalities headline domain has seen the most improvements, I think, this year compared to the year before. We're hoping that the domain names are now clearer, and we added a indicator for representation for people from Black and ethnic minority groups in terms of the representation of local councillors compared to the local authority area distribution. And sustainability, again, this is a bit slightly different to the two other headlines that we've spoken about before. So sustainability is really looking into the future. Are we delivering conditions for well-being sustainably so that we can preserve these good conditions for generations in the future? Again, we've got a couple of highlights here. Tower Hamlets and Salford, the only local authorities with very high scores. You can just about maybe see them as dark green on the map. And we've moved on. We've improved the sustainability headline as well. We added waste generation as a new indicator, recognizing that just recycling isn't enough. So if we look at how much is being recycled, we look at that relative to the amount of waste generated in total. We've also added housing, energy efficiency and tree cover. And yeah, basically all of the domains are made up of different indicators. It's a bit more of a technical point. And yeah, we're moving on. There is a function, there's a mapping function on the website. So this is just another thing to highlight for your use. You can select your local authority areas, and if you are in an upper tier or lower tier local authority, you can see the differences between your the upper tier local authority on the map and the district map. So that can show you a bit of the difference between a larger and a smaller place in terms of the scores as well. And I think that's it for the sort of short overview of the findings. We'd very much like to talk to anyone who's interested a bit more.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That's incredibly helpful. So before we go out to our wider panel, I just wanted to make it really clear that this isn't just some nice theory. This is not just a kind of theoretical thing that we're doing in some sort of ivory tower. It's also not just about data. It's about really, really practical change across that kind of golden thread that I mentioned earlier. It's very much not aspirational. So just in terms of a few different examples of the sorts of ways, I'm not going to necessarily name names, but the sorts of ways that we're working with people across this golden thread right now. So local authorities, how are they already using it? They're using it in many different ways, sometimes with our help, and really interestingly, sometimes without. We get quite a few messages going, oh yes, we've used the whole of the Thriving Places Index across to redo our policy or our public health strategy, which, to be honest with you, is a huge compliment, and we're delighted about that. But we also quite like working with people to try and embed it. But so a lot of local authorities really find it useful in terms of helping that cross-sectoral partnerships. More and more places are recognising it's not just about government, that placemaking and really deep-rooted change needs to be about all parts of society, and that's quite hard to achieve because everyone's got their own priorities, their own goals, their own sets of metrics. So the Thriving Places Index can really help those places that are looking at that very partnership approach to change to really bring people together around some shared headline goals, around some agreed metrics that are trusted and supported in that sense. I think it's also being really helpfully used to really reshape and sometimes shake up that notion that a health and well-being strategy is something that sits over there with the CCG or the local health authority. That actually a health and well-being strategy is everybody's strategy. It's everybody's job. It's everybody's strategy. It doesn't matter whether you're in the economic department, in the development department, the community department, the health and safety department. Your job is to improve the capacity for each of the citizens to thrive. And I think that really gives a lot of energy to local government workers who themselves are very stretched and can be very siloed in their working, to start recognizing both the opportunities to work across departments, but also the huge ripple effects of their work across all sorts of different elements. So I think those are two different examples of ways people are using it. They're also using it as a bit of a leadership tool. How do we think differently? How do we think more progressively for the 21st century? Funders and commissioners are increasingly using it, which is exciting for us. More and more funders, we've got one on our panel, but we have some in the audience, are understanding that actually their work is place-based. Whether they've been thinking like that before or not, it is place-based because it's in places that people's well-being and lives is played out. So more and more of them are trying to use the Thriving Places Index to understand place better and to sit down with people and look at that mirror back to them of this data, tracking what's working, tracking what needs focus, using some of those shared metrics in the Thriving Places Index to start understanding how can we track change over time against these really fundamentally important things. And also projects and partnerships in communities. They're starting to use it in a really interesting way. We're doing some work right across Birmingham and Solihull at the moment with some very inspiring people working with about 180 different projects and partners to develop different ways for very diverse communities to get more physically active. But they recognize very early on that it wasn't just about how many people run around the park. It's also about what impact that has on social cohesion. What impact does that have on our use of public transport? What impact does that have on trust and safety and security? Those are much broader outcomes rather than just outputs from those projects in communities, are things that people are starting, insightful people are starting to recognize, and they're using the Thriving Places Index as a way to start understanding what some of those interconnections might be and what the best metrics are that are around to do that in. I know there have been quite a lot of questions come up before about what do we actually do this at a more local level than local authorities. We are working with those communities who are most interested at adapting the Thriving Places to their particular context, using local data, embedding more and more detail underneath the headlines that we're able to give consistently across the country, and helping create little dive deeper sets of indicators for their particular needs. So we don't publish nationally at a very local level, but we're very open and interested in working with local places who want to do that. So anyway, let's stop talking about this in principle and let's start widening out this discussion and finding out what others think in this space. I'm going to stop the video sharing right now, or I'm going to attempt to, and bring us all back to here. And I'm going to broaden this out to the panel, and I'm going to introduce them as I go, if that's all right with them. And I'm going to start with Nancy Hay. Nancy Hay is the director of the What Works Centre for Wellbeing that has been going for the last 5 years, that are doing huge amounts of deeply important work, building the evidence base, supporting people to understand what it really means, to find out what does work. It's a fantastic name. I wish we'd thought of it sooner. What does work for supporting wellbeing locally, nationally and globally? Nancy, I've got an introductory question for you, if you wouldn't mind, a brief headline answer to. You've been leading the What Works Centre for Wellbeing for 5 years now. I'm really interested in what changes you've seen in that national and international kind of thinking, action, attitudes, if you like, to the importance of wellbeing in policy making. What changes have you seen?
Thank you, Liz. It's great to see the index launch today. I love the data when it comes out. It's one of the things I absolutely love, and it's our data as individuals and as communities, and it's fantastic to make it accessible in this way. It's really exciting. So what changes have I seen? So the What Works Centre for Wellbeing set up in 2014-15, and internationally, actually a large number of the organisations are aligned. They may not always call it wellbeing, but the OECD, the UN with the SDGs, the sort of ILO, I can list off acronyms from now on. The European Commission recently committed as well to a wellbeing as a goal. Nationally in the UK, I'm really excited by what the UK is doing. And I think there's been studies looking at who's doing this internationally, and the UK are really leading the way. Both nationally, it's not always called wellbeing, it could be called outcomes, it could be the goal of the Green Book as social welfare redefined as wellbeing. Lots of different things are happening, but you can see in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, where it's in this new Northern Ireland Agreement, where wellbeing is the goal. You can see a shift to outcomes approaches in the budget. You can see it in a range of different legislation. So I think it really is happening. But what is exciting about this work is about implementation. So making it happen horizontally across different areas, making it relevant to different areas. So you can see organizations that are typically maybe an environmental one thinking about their social and economic impact. So the Canal and Rivers Trust is a fantastically big charity doing exactly that. You can see that in civic universities, you can see that in anchor institutions in the NHS, but every sector is making that relevant, and we have a whole load of examples. So I think it really has shifted. It may not always be called well-being, but this idea that what actually makes a difference, has it made a difference to people's lives? How do we know, is starting to happen. But again, this for me is about a shared data set, a shared evidence that we can all do. It's ours, it's our community data. How can we all use that to make the biggest difference to people's lives?
Great, thanks, Nancy. No, pretty tough question to ask you to summarize the last 5 years in 2 minutes, but yeah, fantastic job as ever. That's great. Thank you for introducing that. Asha Craig, I'm aware of the fact that we lost you there briefly on the Zoom link, so you might not have heard all of Nancy's response. Asha Craig is the Deputy Mayor of Bristol, and a huge lifelong champion of equalities and community issues in general, and a great advocate for the city that I'm sitting in today. So Asha, we've been hearing a bit about how the national policy picture, both in England, but right across the UK and beyond, is starting to shift. But perhaps, you know, at a national level in England, at least, we're not necessarily seeing that shift as fast as some of us would like to see. What role do you think that local governments have in pioneering this new approach, or any new approach like this, to place-based change? And what benefits do you think it can bring at a local level if we do take those steps?
Okay, very quickly in 2 minutes, I think cities have a key role to play in pioneering this approach. As you know, in Bristol, we've pioneered something called the One City approach, where the City Council, through the Mayor, has kind of led a call of collective responsibility across all of our key partners. And as a result of that, we have developed something called the One City plan. And it was interesting, I was looking at the Thriving Places Index and seeing how so much aligned the Thriving Cities Index is to the work that we're doing and shaping going forward from now until 2050. And I think what's really important is that we need something. We need the Thriving Cities Index. You know, I'm a huge fan, which will help us to kind of identify, are we actually making the difference that we say we are, whether we're the local authority, the universities, the police, etc. So the new approach is really essential. We really need to get to the core of, are we actually making a difference in the lives of the many communities right across the city? In some places, in terms of the actions that we are taking, people will say, yes, we are. But I hear too many voices from those in more, I hate using the word deprived, more disadvantaged communities, from being Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and poorer working class communities who feel that they are not getting the benefits or deriving the benefits that we are trying to bring to everyone in the city. So I think the index plays an important role in helping us to understand, are we actually reaching everybody? Because on the one level, when I look at the index, I can see that, yeah, Bristol is looking good. You know, I'd like us to be more green. I noticed that in terms of sustainability, we're high up there, and also in terms of equality, but actually we're still not reaching the parts that we need to in this city. And I think the index will allow us to really work hard and identify where all of our collective efforts, we can actually work together much more productively to actually make the lives of people in the city who are not feeling those benefits, as I said, you know, be much better. So, you know, I'm really keen to see the Thriving Cities Index kind of underpin our city plan, and we can use that on a year-on-year basis to demonstrate, are we actually making a real difference in the lives of our citizens? And I think cities have that role to play, because they are the democratically elected leaders of the city, and we have the power to bring all key partners to the table.
Thanks so much, Asha. Yeah, and I think that political leadership is also already showing some dividends, both in terms of the city, but also in terms of, we get approached by, we're working already with some quite innovative funders in the city. We're working with public health teams, etc., to try and integrate this thinking into it. And a lot of this is a head shift as much as it is anything else, because once people get it, they start acting differently. I'm going to bring Richard in now, if you don't mind, Asha. We also have with us Richard Harries, who's the director of the Power to Change Research Institute. Delighted to have you with us, Richard. Richard, I know it's difficult to put you in a box here because you've got so many interesting hats on, but you work for what is realistically a very influential funder in this space of local place-based change. What are you seeing amongst the sort of funder community, if you like, in terms of openness to a focus on well-being and its role in a more kind of joined up approach to supporting change on the ground?
Thanks, Liz. I'd just like to start by joining Nancy in welcoming you. Congratulations on the launch of the new index today. Yes, at Power Change, we are absolutely a place-based funder. We're the foundation for community business, and the sorts of organizations we seek to support are deeply, deeply rooted in their places. They also, of course, have trading at their heart as well. And I just want to say at this particular time, obviously they're facing, just as the rest of the private sector is facing, a pretty torrid time in terms of uncertainty about the future, particularly because of all the good work they already do in the community. And if there are any community businesses in the audience today, I just wanted to reassure you that at Power Change, we're doing everything we can to support the whole sector over the coming weeks and months. It's absolutely essential that their good work continues. On your question, Liz, you're right. Lots of funders talk about being place-based funders, and there are some really great examples. Obviously, the Joseph Franto Foundation has been working in York for a very long time. Rank Foundation has got a focus on Plymouth at the moment, which has been incredibly useful. At Power to Change, we've been working with Bristol City Council for quite a long time now, doing some really good work in Liverpool City region. And we have also been looking at a number of very small local neighbourhood areas. And I think that's where this gets really quite interesting. A tool like the index becomes incredibly interesting because it can be both a diagnostic tool for understanding an area, but also a sort of outcomes management tool as well. Because the thing about being a place-based funder is it's not just about funding a place, because in that sense, everyone funds someone who's based in a place. It's about recognizing something about a place that you want to fund and doing it over time, a commitment to a place over time. And if you're willing to invest over a sufficiently long time period, then actually the index becomes, as I say, not just a diagnostic tool, but also potentially an outcome management tool. And so that sort of tool is really helpful. And what's really nice about the index is exactly what Lisa was talking about earlier, both the simplicity of the overall headline measures, but the ability to dive down into the detail quite quickly, but still in a way that's accessible to decision makers. And I think that's really important. And that hopefully will be something that more funders use going forward.
Great, thank you, Richard. Super helpful from all of you. So I'm going to widen this up a little bit, just a quick discussion amongst us, and then don't worry, audience, we're coming to many of your questions which are flooding in, and I'm struggling to keep up with the many different technologies I'm currently supporting here, but we will absolutely get to your questions in a moment. I wanted to just a quick discussion amongst the five of us, if I can. The Thriving Places Index, and of course the Centre for Thriving Places that's behind it, is trying to support a shift, quite a big shift from a sort of very simplistic approach that prioritises the growth of, by and large, a fairly simple number of GDP. And we're offering a framework that paints a much broader picture of the many, many factors that influence our capacity to thrive. Now, we know there are pros and cons and benefits and challenges around that much more holistic, broad brush approach. How do you think that helps us? And what are some of the challenges of embedding that less simplistic approach, let's be honest, into how places work, not just how people use data. So we've gone from very simplistic to quite complex. We tried to keep it reasonably simple. What are some of the benefits and what are some of the challenges in helping to embed that from your different perspectives? And I'm going to come first to you, Asha, if that's all right, both in terms of that place-based local thing and partnership approaches, but also in terms of those equality issues that you mentioned earlier. I think you're still muted, Asha.
I'm unmuted. Sorry, apologies. Sorry. Yeah, I think the reality is that what we've got to remember that there are many communities throughout our city who still lack the capacity to really kind of engage with this kind of agenda. Many of them are just at stage one. You know, when I think about the work. So, for example, in terms of the work that we're doing around our One City plan, one of the things is that we have extremely high level objectives, but everybody says to me, but Asha, you know, how can we make it real for people in communities? What our ambitions? How is it going to touch these people? How do they know that they are going to make a difference? How do we make it simpler for those communities? And actually this year we're going to be embarking on a whole series of engagement across the whole of the city, because we do want to make it's no good us producing all of these high level strategic documents when we're talking about a city and we're leaving out the very said people who are actually the ones who are going to make that real difference to us. So we have to kind of build the capacity. We have to support those communities to actually kind of engage with these tools. And I know you've done some really good work in this over the last few years as well. So I would like to see, I would like to take the index and kind of pilot it throughout different local neighborhoods and communities, and align that, as I said, with the overall ambitions of the city, so the communities that themselves can see any shift or change in their circumstances and the inequality.
And I think one of the exciting things that we're finding in terms of when we are working with communities is that once you get down to that more granular level, everyone can see their piece in it. They might be a tiny community project, but they're improving that one piece of the index. And because it's part of a bigger thing, they can start to see how their work has a value on that bigger scale. So part of it is about celebrating what's working and celebrating the social value, the human and environmental value of every single contributor to that wider place-based change.
You know, Bristol is made up of 34 different wards. There's 34 different places, and even amongst those wards, there are tiny little neighbourhoods. So, you know, we have to get down to that granular if we're going to be truly successful in making our cities thriving places that we know they can be and are.
Thanks, Asha. Nancy, I know this is a question that you have to grapple with all the time. You know, we all want a nice, simple solution. We want one number. We want something we can grab the headlines with. What do you think some of the challenges are around prioritization if we provide quite a holistic set of measures like this? And what does the evidence base tell us about how we think about those broad conditions in a way that's practical?
Hi. So these are great questions. I'm also looking at the ones that are coming through on the Q&A. So, I mean, this is big. And it's quite hard. Otherwise, we'd have done it already. You do still need to be able to make choices and allocate resources. And actually, whilst some of these areas you can see quite discreetly where you fit in and how you contribute. So it has that purpose in helping you understand how you contribute to this bigger whole. And actually, I liked one of the questions in the Q&A, could you use this for goal setting? And I think that would be really cool. So the SDGs are Sustainable Development Goals, are goals. Wales has goals. And you could use these as not just averages, but like actually, what are we trying to achieve in our area and how are we contributing, each of us? But we use life satisfaction as a way to help weight the difference this has on people's lives. It's not the only way we can do that, but it's quite a good one because it captures economic, social impacts particularly. And we're working on methodologies to make sense of that. And you can start to see what that means in terms of priorities. So it makes mental health a really big priority. And despite all the changes we've had over the last 30 years in terms of prime ministers, mental health has stayed up there. It means social connections, as we're seeing in stark relief at the moment, but that relationships bit becomes really important. And whilst we have a Minister for Loneliness and a Minister for Suicide Prevention, actually those things are really positive. And the other one is we've had a focus on jobs, which will become even more important over the next 6 months to a year, but also on job quality. So that helps us weight it a little bit. And there are really difficult bits helping understand why jobs and the environmental decisions become quite tricky, but there must be ways of helping us broaden out this. The other bit was on GDP though. And so for me, it's really clear that leading economists understand that there is a role for economic policy to achieve inclusive and sustainable rises in societal well-being. And GDP is a number that's used, but we're starting to see a much broader range of economic indicators used and for understanding economic policy. But the other metric that is commonly used in this way is life expectancy, and we're starting to see healthy life expectancy. And again, that comes under stark contrast. You can see how health and growth are interrelated. The question we saw most recently was whose GDP this is and what's this GDP for? And so that quality of growth question comes in. But that whose GDP one is really important, because whilst you've got averages in here, I think one of the questions picked this, the averages hide distributional effects. And if we're trying to improve the well-being of a nation, actually you have to look at that distribution. And that's kind of what I understand levelling up to be. But some of the solutions to that levelling up will be economic as well. So that's kind of where I'm getting. This is hard and it's difficult, and we're getting there.
Great, thank you. Last and definitely not least, Richard, you've talked about the role of social business. We've just touched on it there, that quality, job quality, the role of the social economy. What does it mean to bring this very holistic approach in? How can it support social business and the important role of that in our growing economy?
Sure, thanks. And just before I answer that, I want to again expand actually and agree with what Nancy was saying about GDP, and just remind everyone in the audience. I think Liz, you might have mentioned Simon Kuznets at the start. Simon Kuznets, the economist who created the concept of GDP 85, 90 years ago. When he was giving a lecture on GDP and well-being, said the welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measure of national income. This is not new, and yet it keeps repeating itself. And having spent over 20 years in the public sector and 10 years in the voluntary and community sector, I'm struck by the deep levels of innumeracy and the sort of fear of numbers, and in particular the kind of mistaken idea that numbers can ever give you the answers to anything, when all the number can ever do is help you to ask better questions. When I started my career in the civil service, the government at the time was market testing prisons, and they wanted a league table for best to worst so they could decide which was the best prison. And even though the underlying methodology was not at all good, it gave them a number, and that's all that they wanted. And it's so disappointing when that happens. And one of the things we've been trying to do at Path to Change is really change that, not to prioritize numbers over judgment, quite the opposite, to augment judgment with the intelligent analysis of numbers. And I think that's the approach we're trying to take with community businesses. So we've been collecting a lot of third-party data, tracking community businesses over a long time period to look at how things like their trading ratios change. But by far the most exciting and interesting thing that I think is relevant to this is the work that we've been doing with the government and with the survey company Kantar that runs the Community Life Survey. Community Life Survey has been going for 20 years now. Lots of local authorities run versions of it for their own areas as well. It measures all the things we care about: health, well-being, trust, cohesion, and it does so really well. But it doesn't allow you the granularity to look at local authority or below. And what we've been doing is running hyper-local boosters at neighbourhood level with the same survey company at the same time. And what you can then do is some really great things like create from the national sample a mirror, a counterfactual mirror of the area you're looking at. So you kind of create an artificial Bradford, and you can compare your figures for Bradford with that artificial Bradford. You can then track that over time and begin to see whether the community businesses that we're supporting are making those places better. And that's the real challenge. We all want to make places better. Tools like the Thriving Places Index give us the potential to do that, but we have to follow it through. And I think there are more and more of us in this part of the sector who are really interested in ways that we can pull together lots of different bits of data, both to triangulate and augment judgment, as I say, but also just be much more creative about how we use it to really understand if we're making a difference. Great.
Thank you so much, Richard. So I'm afraid later than we promised, we're getting to the question and answers, and they're absolutely flooding in. I just wanted to summarize one element of it. There's lots of really interesting, quite detailed questions about the methodology, which indicators we use, how we came about it, how we do the maths, all of which are deeply important and we take extremely seriously. And Lisa on the panel could talk to you about for a very long time. To summarize that, I'm just going to encourage people who sent those questions in. All of the methodology, all of the indicators, everything is on the website, which has been updated yesterday with all the new data. So instead of using loads of time on tiny micro questions, I'm going to encourage you to do that. If you've submitted specific questions about your area, we'll get back to you after today with those details, so we can make sure that this Q&A is relevant to the broader audience. So I hope that's enough answer on that for now. I'm going to take a couple of fairly headline questions now, and I'm going to bring those to the team. Richard, you mentioned just now about that notion of our obsession with best and worst. There are a few questions coming in about who's come top in this, you know, why are we bottom in this, etc. Now, I'm not going to get into that methodologically, but I'm interested to hear from any of the panel. I might actually come to you first, Nancy, just to give you a heads up. How we get that a lot, of course, and we try to work really hard with media and with our partners to get people, I think the way I put it is to get more curious about what's lying behind those headlines rather than just be simplistic about it. It's an uphill struggle. Even this weekend, great article for us in the Observer, but talking about Salford winning. How can we support that head shift away from very simplistic best and worst rankings idea? A quick headline thought from you on that, and what benefits would we get if we thought a little bit more curiously about it all?
This is really tricky because people really like a best and worst list, and it can really galvanize action to say, oh God, we're the worst at this, or being really proud of it. So for me, we've tried to always encourage people to think thoughtfully about why it is how it is in this area and what they can do in this area. So one of the things I like about the Thriving Playfit Index is that we worked with you to help understand how to build a set of indices that really matter to people's lives. And I think where I'd start with any solution, with any organization or anything else, is like understand your context before you try and understand what works. And so whilst an index like this, in terms of pros and cons, helps you work out where you might want to focus, you need to understand the drivers and how they apply to your area first.
Yeah, great answer. We've also got some quite interesting questions, Lisa, coming in about can this be applied both at a more local level, and can it be applied to other countries? I'm massively clumping questions together because we've got dozens of them. Can you give a quick headline about how we either are or can support what I suppose we'd look at as the adaptation of the Thriving Places to different contexts, rather than just the replication and assumption that we can just plonk things on top of other places?
Sure. So we have used the Thriving Places Index as a sort of framework in a more local setting. So obviously the headline elements, the domains and the subdomains have been put together with a lot of research behind it to look at what impacts on those conditions for well-being. So at a local level, that could mean that rather than, if the data aren't available at your neighborhood or ward level where you or the data that we have isn't at that level, there might be data available in your local area that could fill that gap. Might not be exactly the same question, might be something slightly similar, but once you get down to that sort of detailed indicator level, there might be something else that could replace it. So you could use the Thriving Places Index as a framework from which you start searching for data to develop a score for a much lower local area. And the same could be applied internationally as well. So again, you could use it as a framework and then look for comparable indicators that are available in your country.
Thanks. Thanks, Lisa. That's great. Sorry, I'm juggling a lot of questions here. There's a question here that's quite interesting, and I might take this up naturally, because if in normal circumstances our sponsor Triodos Bank were going to have somebody on the panel, but unfortunately illness, as is the case at the moment, has meant they can't join us. But there's some really interesting questions coming in around how can this be used by not just funders, which we've heard a bit about, but also those people who have got things to invest, whether they're banks, financial services, other investors, in understanding that kind of more than financial value thing. You know, how do we embed social value, environmental value, broader place-based value into our investment decisions on lots of different levels, but right from the individual all the way up to organizations and funding institutions. I think that's a really, really interesting space. We're just actually, it's not yet public, we're just about, I hope, to launch a partnership project around financial well-being and what that means, more than just some nice bit of life insurance. And I think it's really, really important that we start using this sort of thinking in our investments. And we're very passionate that investment means not just money, but investment of the skills that we're seeing in our society, of the community resilience, of the things that we're starting to see, ironically, as our economy and our society is starting slightly to crumble. How do we value those things that really, really matter to people? And how do we support people who do have money to invest, to value those and measure them in a different way? So I think there's lots and lots of exciting things coming out of there, and people like Triodos are absolutely leading the way, but also different and new businesses, as Richard has described, are doing some of that. I also wanted to touch on...
Liz, can I just come in a moment? I just wanted to say, because obviously as a local authority, we've brought in a social value policy that we are now using in terms of how we invest in commission services. It really is important to us, and we will not invest, we will not commission certain businesses to kind of deliver on our agenda if they cannot clearly demonstrate the social value behind what it is they're doing. And secondly, I just wanted to come back on the point that we were talking about kind of the use of the index. You know, in Bristol, we've got quality of life survey, we've got index of local deprivation, you've got the joint strategic needs analysis. You have all of these you know, these different tools that we are using, but they can be quite complex. And particularly the index of local deprivation, you know, that it's very marked and very measured how people are doing in employment, education, etc., etc. But the index just goes that so much more further, and it makes it much more, it's so much more relevant. Many of the issues, well, all of the indicators within the index, it makes it so much more powerful, I think, for local communities to kind of track their own progress. And I like the idea that was being mooted about, you know, possibly tracking over time the progress that certain communities are making on particular issues, whatever that may be. So yeah, I just wanted to come in there. Sorry.
Can I add a point at this point as well, actually, just because I think it builds on what you're saying, Asha. You know, I've certainly tried not to mention any other indices that are out there, but there are other indices out there, including the great granddaddy, the index of multiple deprivation. And what I really like about the Thriving Places Index is that it doesn't try and simplify it all down to one number. It deliberately forces you to say there are three top level numbers, which then subdivide out, but there are three top level numbers. Because, you know, if you read the methodology for the indices of multiple deprivation, dig deep down into the technical report, what they'll say is, you know, there are 7 subdomains, they're weighted. The weights they've chosen are a little bit arbitrary, but everyone agrees they're broadly right and no one really wants to change them. For a fund like Power to Change, one of the things we really care about is access to local services. And that is included in the index of multiple deprivation. But with the current weighting structure, it only gets about 5% of the total weight. And so a bit of work we did with the University of West of England was just to re-weight the IMD so that access to services got more weight for it. And that was great, because what you then found is that places like Liverpool, basically deprivation doesn't change because it's so deep and pervasive that, you know, the areas don't change. But you go to a rural area and all of a sudden this new level of deprivation comes out. And that's the thing, is what we need to get to is a situation where funders and investors are much more comfortable with digging into these sorts of indices and not just going for the simple top line measure.
Really, really helpful, Richard, and I completely agree with you. I think it's one of the things that's quite exciting about us, people using the Thriving Places as this kind of lens, that actually you can pull some of those different domains and subdomains to the fore for different places and start seeing very, very different pictures at different levels of geography, at different, with different prioritizations in it. I also just wanted to quickly add to that actually, and it's only, I'm trying to summarize about 50 different questions that have come in as you've all been talking. There are questions about things like, can we use this to track things like the SDGs, which we touched on earlier? Can we use this to be thinking differently about our climate emergency, more and more local authorities declaring a climate emergency? These are things that we're being asked about all of the time. We're really excited about how people are starting to make these connections for themselves. You know, a climate emergency is partly about how we've been thinking about the economy. It's also how we deal with it, as well as the current crisis, of course, is hugely about how we develop resilient, healthy, equitable, meaningful measures of progress for the future, so we don't go down exactly the same rabbit holes we have perhaps gone down in the past. I am really, really conscious of time. We absolutely promised everybody who signed up to the webinar that we'd finish at 4. So despite the fact that we've got loads of questions, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collate all of those questions that everyone's brought. Ones we can answer directly to you, we will answer. If the panel are happy with this, I'm going to share some of those broader ones and see if we can pull out a few, perhaps some blogs coming up, some discussion pieces, so that we can have an opportunity to explore some of this as we go forward. It's also been recorded so more people can get to this later, and it's on YouTube Live. So I think we've already gone out to hundreds of people, and many more will hear it afterwards. So we will make sure we follow up on a lot of those themes that are coming up. They're really exciting themes. They're ones we're looking forward to working with people on. I just wanted to finish, if I may, with one last kind of reminder that we can get going on this, despite the fact that we are facing a very, very difficult time at the moment. We can do things now. So what we want everybody who's watching to do today or in the next few days, despite, perhaps because we're all, as you can see from these webinar pictures, we're all in our kitchens or our bedrooms or our home offices. So whilst we're in those spaces, let's start thinking about this and thinking about ways we can integrate it. So explore the scores on the Thriving Places Index website, have a look, have a play, see what it means to you and how you might be able to get your place involved. You can access more data. We're developing new sort of membership plans so people can start getting more involved, get more data, share their best innovations and solutions so that we can start spreading learning around the place. We do lots more analysis, research and reporting, often with other partners, of which we have some extraordinary ones around the country, including 1 or 2 of the ones who are on the panel. You can access more consultancy and support. One of the things we've learned in the 10 years is that data isn't enough. It's very, very, very important first step, but people need more support. And we and our partners and our advisors are here to support you to really embed this into the way that you work. So don't feel like you need to be on your own in this space. And also, we also have our happiness pulse tool, which can really measure community wellbeing and social value at a really, really micro level. And we're getting flooded with interest at the moment in how can we start using this to track some of the impacts of our current crisis in those communities. So if you're interested in that, have a look on that website too. I really wanted to have one last thank you to the panel, to Lisa, my lovely colleague, of course, but also to Richard, to Nancy and Asha. They are deeply busy people whose lives have only, like the rest of us, got busier in the last week with the current crisis. So we're extremely grateful to them for joining us today and for their continued support in our work. So thank you all. We're not allowed to shake hands anymore, so we're all getting very good at this thank you for the future. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors, Triodos, and our great supporters today, particularly Green TV. And also I wanted to do a shout out thank you to our absolutely amazing board of trustees, but also our advisory board from all over the world, in fact, who help us steer a really strong course in this space and have helped us achieve what we have in the last 10 years and hopefully even more in the next 10. And to my amazing team, who, despite the fact that we are now remote working, are there helping this work to move forward. So please indulge me in thanking each and every one of them for the amazing work they do. Thank you very much all for tuning in today. That's a new one for me. Thanks for tuning in. And thank you for your own pioneering work in this wellbeing economy space. We can only do it together. So we very much look forward to doing it with all of you in the coming months, years and decades to come. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Liz. Well done.
Thanks.
Thanks, Liz. That was great. Really well done sharing us all online.
I don't know if we've lost all our participants. I'm just waiting to see.
No, 38.
No. Okay, I might close this down and then we will be back in touch. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Liz.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks, Richard.